Okay, so this is gonna be the after action report for the third multiplayer server match for Riftborne. I'm gonna go over the pre-game setup and the team rosters first. Okay, no, I should start with what my goal was. So my personal goal before the server started was that I wanted to try my shot at essentially what is a pickup game for a persistent online war game. Usually for games in this genre, I get the opportunity to make my team some, days or weeks beforehand. I get to choose, well, I get to organize and orchestrate all the different players that I kind of know or try to learn something about and then get them all together and then embark on however long the campaign's going to be. For this multiplayer server match, the whole server lasted for 20 days, so that's 20 real days. I'll try my best to explain the mechanics of the game in the unlikely event that there's somebody out there watching this video that is trying to learn about the game. So I'll try explain all the technical details when they come relevant so that you can follow along here if you have no idea what it is that I'm talking about. So yeah, my personal goal is that I want to try organizing and leading a pickup game. Usually in Riftborne multiplayer server matches, or at least at the time of recording this this after action report, we are capped at 60 players for a server. So you get around about 14 to 15 players per faction, assuming it's a full lobby. We only get to have a pre-game lobby of 3 players. So basically, you can choose up to 2 other players to be in a pre-game lobby, which you then get assigned to a faction. All right. So I got the chance to get Deadslide and Glad, who their Discord ID is Askareth and Red Sun. They were involved in the previous multiplayer match, of which I have the after action report for that also on my channel. I'll put the link to that below. So you only get to choose you can only have up to 3 guys that kind of know each other before the game starts. And then when the game starts, that's when all the different lobbies are assigned to a faction. And people who are not in lobbies but are pre-registered, so solo players, they also then, once the game starts, get assigned to a faction. So within a faction, you can have solo randoms and pre-game lobbies all together, or you could have just all, well, I don't know how it is that the dev did it, but it's usually just a mix. It's a mix of people that know each other that are together, up to 3 guys, and other people who have no idea who anybody is. So yeah, that was what I wanted to do. It was going to be a challenge for me, and that's yeah, it worked out pretty well for me. I got what I wanted out of it. So our initial team roster, I had Deadslide and Glad. They ended up becoming my officers for the faction. One of the big things that happened in the previous multiplayer match was that Glad, who was the initial leader for the winning faction in the previous multiplayer match, he burned out real fast because he basically had no help. I tried my best to help him out, but because it was my first time playing, I had no idea what any of the mechanics were. I couldn't really help out. There wasn't much that I could do. But so this time I made sure that there were going to be 2 guys, whether they liked it or not, they were going to have to help me out with the internal politics and with just helping out, keep the team focused on operations. Also help teach new players because we had quite a few of them as well. Um, yeah. So the rest of the team roster, we had Dots, who was a veteran of the previous match as well. I think he also played in the first multiplayer match. I think he was our dedicated number cruncher. So every time we had like a technical question which hadn't been tried in the game before, he'd go and like uh play a single player match, or he'll just get the numbers. I don't know how he does it. I don't know anything about all the numbers in the game. I'm the least versed player in the spreadsheet side of the game. I don't really care to know any of that. I get other people to do the math for me. Yeah, like Dots. So every time we had a question regarding, technical mechanics in the game, he'd be the guy that would go out and crunch the numbers and test things out for us and figure it out. We had 3 guys that were Chobo, Nikita, and Gaz. Gaz was a veteran of the previous match as well. Great team players. I got very lucky with the whole team roster here. The caliber of players that I got and the kind of characters that I got, to have them all together in one faction like this, which was, as far as I know, all randomly selected once the factions are assigned at the start of the game, it was very rare. We got lucky in that regard. So yeah, these guys were great. Everyone was a great team player all around. Everyone followed orders and they took initiative whenever necessary to help accomplish the objectives as we tried to win the game. We had a guy called Xixitle. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm just gonna call him Zix. He was a one-man army. Definitely the MVP. We'll get into details as to why later on. We only had two players from the original roster drop out, which is quite common. That happened in the previous multiplayer match, and from what I've been told, the very first multiplayer match, a lot of people just stopped playing the game within like the first couple of days or the first week or so. So yeah, that was our initial team roster. I'll put the names up. I'll put all the screenshots of the game when they become relevant on the screen, so you can follow a little bit easier. The match lasted 20 days, so that's 20 real days. For those who don't know, who are following the video, Riftborne, the server runs 24/7. So when you log off, the game's still running, and your teammates and your enemies, they can still log in and still do things. So you can still build things, and they go still also attack you and do all this and that. Right. So I'll get into some of the grand strategy stuff. So straight off the bat, it's just play fundamentals. I'm not the kind of guy when it comes to these kind of games where I try to make some fancy trick plays or gambit type strategies. I always default to the fundamentals, and the fundamentals for Riftborne and any other kind of persistent online war game is that the number one resource, the only thing that you should ever really truly consider once the game starts, is player activity. If you don't have active players, everything else is academic, all right? Everyone so far in the Riftborn community is just obsessed with the numbers. We have an entire community that's just made up of spreadsheet simulator nerds, which it's helpful. Like I said, I need people to crunch the numbers for me to war game out certain scenarios on the technical aspects of the game. But outside of that, the community just is obsessed with making numbers go up, and that's it. That's all everyone can ever think about. And it's what everyone is obsessed with talking about. And I tried to explain to people in the previous match that this game that we have here is a lot more complex than what it is that they're used to. And I'm assuming that these guys are all the Paradox game folks, U4, Hoi4, and all that. Um, Riftborn is special. And I like it a lot because there's a ridiculous amount of nuance that's available to be exploited if you know what it is that you're doing. Basically, there's like a sandbox element to it in terms of how the game plays out, especially on the multiplayer server match here. And we will get into details as we continue with this after action report. So, playing fundamentals, player activity is king. All right, without that, everything else is basically irrelevant. Now, my personal philosophy whenever I play games like these is that you don't want to think of yourself as a general or admiral. I see this happen so many times in other games. Hell Let Loose, Foxhole. Um, I've seen it happen in Squad a couple of times as well. People think they're like some big shot General Patton kind of guy, and that's what their job is. That's not the. If you're the commander and leader in a game like this, right? Your main job isn't to be a general, right? Your job is actually to be like the dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons. At first, people probably think that that's crazy. What if these two games are completely in different genres? Yes, they are, but like I said, the underlying philosophy is exactly the same. And this is the kind of mindset that, in my opinion, you should have because in my opinion, in my experience, the best way to go about doing things. The whole point of being the faction leader in the online war game that lasts, persistent days, weeks, months, you're there to facilitate the play. All right, you're there to facilitate your team's play. You want to get everyone involved because if they're not involved, if they're not interested, and if you don't keep their interest, then like I said, going back to fundamentals, everything else is academic. It doesn't matter. So it just so happens that the best way, mechanically to go about becoming a DM, you know, the underlying philosophy is that you end up doing the general type stuff, right? You end up doing the strategy and the diplomacy and handling the politics and all that. But yeah, if you go about trying to lop as like a general, you're not gonna get very far. I've never seen anyone actually play that kind of scenario out to the end and survive. They usually burn out really hard and then just like they lose most of the time. But this way of thinking about it, it has more long-term sustainability. So as the leader, as I said, you need to keep the team motivated, keep them cohesive, and then guide them onto a single objective. The strategy part, you can get somebody else to do the strategy part for you, I suppose. But I usually handle it because I don't trust anybody else to do it. This means that a lot of work gets loaded onto whoever it is, whoever the leader is, and you need to be careful about that because you can burn out. That's the grand strategy stuff. Now the strategy, the normal strategy, the opening strategy. Um, all about decision making for the first 12, well, no, I should say the first 5 hours or so of the game. It was decided on my past experience in the previous game, which I was part of the winning faction, which Glad was leading, who is now my officer in this game. It was that plus the changes that the dev posted on the new rule set that was going to be used in this multiplayer match. Now, the thing is that we didn't get the full picture of what the change rule set was. We actually had to figure out some of the changes in the game mechanically wise as the game started and was progressing. I was annoyed by that, and I think quite a lot of other people were annoyed by that too. But the original strategy that I had was based off mainly the previous match, where we want to isolate a single faction and then start raiding them, because raiding the enemy early on that that gives you a really big boost in resource income. And if you do it right, uh, if you manage to suppress and knock out the enemy fleets very early on, and then just start raid farming them, then you can get really good gains when you go into the middle game. So that was kind of the general idea. I had a couple of other strategies as well that were more conservative, and they were all based off the previous game, basically. Okay, before I go into details of what the three initial strategies that were drawn up, I should probably discuss the internal politics. So right off the bat, I wanted to be the leader. I made that clear to Dead and Glad as we started the game. We had only one internal kind of hiccup, which I will discuss later. But overall, I had no internal political, conflicts. No one tried to do a coup or anything like that. And everyone basically stuck with me throughout the entirety of the match. So I had Dead and Glenn, who were going to be my officers. They were going to shoulder some of the extra responsibilities so that I don't burn out so damn fast. And they did a lot of work as well when it came to teaching the new players in the game and handling some of the major operations. Um, I was the leader, right? So I was like I don't know how to explain it. The fleet admiral, if you want to use a real world military comparison, it was my job to handle the strategy, handle the politics, handle the people. But when it came down to like actually doing all the fighting, the fleet commander, that was more dead slide. That's what he stepped up and did. He handled all of the tactical and operational level stuff because he's much more experienced in this kind of genre of gaming. Like I said, I don't actually know what all the numbers do. I still don't know what any of the numbers do. Uh, glad pointed it out as well that I actually don't really know how to play the game. But as I said at the beginning of the video, like the entire community is just obsessed with the mechanics. We are all stifling the potential of the game by just focusing on that because there's so much potential that this game has, and it's just really, really annoying. Well, for me to see that no one else can see this. Yeah, I'll get into more details on that later because that some drama pops up with regards to that as well later on. Okay, so back to the strategy. The three strategies that I had cooked up at the very beginning, these are all based on mainly the previous match. We could isolate Eclipse Dominion, or ED. We'll use the short form initials for all the factions throughout the video. we could isolate ED and then whack them immediately. That's because we had a forward player that was spawned in next to them. Uh, for those who don't know, for this specific match, Vale, the culture, there's three cultures. There's Astrian, Vale, and oh my god, what the hell was the other one? Jeez, Vakon. Yeah, I think it's Vakon. Yeah. Uh, Out of all these three cultures, Vale is the more favored. It's the strongest. It's strongest in terms of in this match, as we found out, basically everything. It was borderline overpowered, and they were also pretty much overpowered in the last multiplayer match. Um, so we had a forward Veil player, and for those who don't know, you can, if you want, watch the previous after action report link in the description below. But basically, by having a forward Veil player in the enemy spawn zone, what happened in the previous match was that this forward Veil player basically just wiped out everybody. We will get back to that later because that becomes a problem with diplomacy later on in the game. So that was one of the strategies that we had. Repeat what happened in the previous game because it worked out in the previous game. I, however, um, didn't want to do this just because I knew that people were gonna have learned from the previous match. The only reason why we got away with that strategy in the previous match was because everyone just didn't know what the hell they were doing. Outside of our faction, no one knew what it was going on, and everyone was super disorganized. No one understood or knew how to actually function as like a cohesive faction. Didn't know how to conduct proper diplomacy or strategy for that matter. That's the only reason why we've actually got away with it. The second strategy we cooked up was to swing against Terran Union or TU. That's because they had the most Astrian players. The reason why that was on the board was because at this point in time, we were made aware of all the nerfs that happened to the Veil culture. So well, I was thinking that, okay, we've already nerfed this culture, which was overpowered in the past. I'm assuming then that with the nerfs that the dev made aware to us prior to the game, that we're not going to be as overpowered. We're probably going to be on par with all the other factions, especially the Astrian players, which the Astrian culture is supposed to be the late game super duper eco masters and whatnot. Thinking long term here, the TU should be the threat because they have the most Astrian players and they were also the ones that had the most logins at the start of the match. The only reason why I bring this up was that this was a metric we had when we were evaluating our opening position in the previous match. We paid attention to who was logging in at the very H-hour start of the game, and that way try to gauge who was going to be actually invested and active in the game. And interesting enough, it's just a pretty good metric to have. They actually pay attention to who logs in the moment the server drops and who's doing things. It's usually a good gauge to figure out who's going to actually be active playing the game throughout the entirety of the game. And like I said, going back to fundamentals, player activity is king. Those are the threats that you need to be aware of. So that was that. The cons to this strategy was that they were on the opposite side of the map, so trying to attack them this early on going to be a little bit difficult. And the last one, which was the one that I was more in favor, was that we just sit back and relax. Because we also had quite a lot of Aston players. We were the second faction with the most Aston players. And oh no, we were tied. Oh yeah, okay. We were actually tied with them. Yeah, so it was the safest, most conservative play. Just sit back and eco greed, and then see what happens later on. Made the most sense. Straight out of the gate for the opening first few hours of the server. So the thing about the way I usually run my teams is that I don't buy into this democracy bullshit. Uh, I'm not the one who figured this out. The ancient Greeks figured this out like 2,000 years ago. When you're in a highly competitive environment, democratic institutions and principles, they don't perform very well. In fact, they don't actually perform well at all. There's a reason why Western military forces, they have sayings along the lines is that our job is to defend democracy, but it's not to exercise it. It's because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. When you're in a highly competitive environment, you gotta be a dictatorship. It's the way it goes. But the thing about being a dictatorship is that you don't necessarily mean doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a tyrant. There's a very, very fine line between the two, which a lot of people don't understand, right? So I had the command chat here for the faction Discord server, which is very important. You got the faction Discord server, right? Is the most important function in the game. Well, no, most important function for the game that's not in the game, if that makes sense. Without effective communication, you can have no command and control, all right? And if you don't have command and control, then you might as well not really be playing in a team at that point, really. I discussed this at length in my previous after action report. I'll just try to sum it down as much as I can so I don't have to repeat myself too much. But yeah, basically, the faction Discord was basically the first thing that was made even before the server started. And I already discussed with Dead and Glad before the server started how it is that we wanted to run this. We need to get everybody into the faction Discord so that in the event that maybe in the off chance that somebody else that gets assigned to our faction wanted to be the faction leader, we'd have some kind of political influence. Because if we get everyone involved into the Discord, we have home ground territory. We can, manipulate things to our advantage. Some of you may be thinking that that's crazy, but trust me, you play games like these long enough, you realize that all these little things, they add up and they pay off. Well, pay off or, crash and burn spectacularly, but they do count and they do matter. As much as I would prefer that they didn't, like I didn't have to deal with drama and actual politics when the shit hits the fan. Um, that's just how these games work. Sadly, that's just how these games work. Okay, so once I started spitballing those ideas to Den and Glad to try to get their thoughts on it, that's when it hit us that there was a massive mechanical change to the rule set for this server. Basically, what had happened was that the dev changed the default speed of all ships, um, the travel time basically. So in the past, it was quite fast to send ships even across the other side of the map. It only took like 20, 30 minutes tops, I think. Or actually, no, maybe up to 30 minutes or so. But what happened was for this game, because certain group of people, which we will discuss later on, complained about certain events that allowed a Veil player, which we won't talk about, to basically single-handedly wipe out their faction. Because in their eyes, the travel times were so fast that they couldn't react, um, which wasn't true. We'll come back to that later. Yeah, so the dev decided to go 180 in the other direction and nuke the travel speed. So now, to try to get things anywhere, whether it be fleets to attack our enemies or even our transport vessels to transfer resources or to colonize new spaces on the map, it would take literally days in some cases for people to move things around, which was absolutely insane. Yeah, we found that out later, about a few hours after I went to sleep and then woke up. Yeah, for me it was 2 a.m. when the server started, so I stayed up till 2 a.m. Stayed up for 1 hour till 3 a.m. It was a work day. I had to do that because I was the commander, and some leadership lessons for anyone who's gonna be stupid enough to play games like these to the level that I played them at least. You have to show up. If you're the leader, you gotta lead, man. You gotta. There's only one way to lead. You gotta be at the front with the troops on the line. If you're just the armchair general guy, which I've seen many people do in many other games as well, it just does not work. The second order effects of trying to play the game like that as the commander basically cripples the entire team to the point where you're just going to get a lot more drama later down the line. So I stayed up on a work day, 2 to 3 a.m., made sure that I got as much information as possible as who the rest of our teammates were, get everybody into the faction Discord, and then play the game from there. That's one of the lessons I can share with y'all with regards to that. I started opening up with diplomacy very early on. So direct in-game personal messages to the faction leaders. That's what started out at the beginning. I think Nomad Clan actually reached out to me first. Um, I was trying to communicate with ED and TU because to me they seem to be the bigger threat. And later on, we found out that NC basically was a non-starter, which happened in the previous game as well. There's always this one faction which just gets all the new players and all the players that just drop out within the first 2 days or so, which is unfortunate. But that's just the way with the way the games are set up. It happens. So Nomad Clan from the get-go was basically a non-starter, and they did not really factor in, I think, to the other faction strategy. They factored into our strategy though, which I'll get into in a bit here. One thing I can say about diplomacy and politics is that everyone so far just seems to think that diplomacy and politics is just talking. That's wrong, man. That's not how it works at all. Diplomacy and politics have to be done to further an objective of some kind. You got to have an overall strategy and plan. You got to have a foreign policy. If you're in the real world or something like that, you got to have a narrative. That's the simplest way I could put it to people. You got to have some kind of train of thought, and then all the diplomacy and politics that happen after that, they all should be designed to further this one objective that you have in mind. That's proper diplomacy and politics. It's not just simply talking to people and trying to make deals, right? It's not like trade deals like a certain person may or may not be trying to do in the real world these days. That's not how it works. That was an open strategy. And then once we found out that there were the changes to the travel speeds, that's when we had to completely rethink our opening game plan. So this then led to the final strategy that we adopted and played out through the whole 20 days. The strategy it came up with was that we were going to focus on the center. The reason why is that the main win condition is in the center. We knew from our experience in the previous match that trying to go for the secondary win condition, which is the keystones, which is spread out in the middle of the map. Trying to go for the secondary win condition, which you can win outright with that, it takes too much time and too many resources, and you also have to go around to other parts of the map. You'll be stretched thin. The center main win condition right smack dab in the middle of the map, which is a special tile that's a black hole. It's much easier to defend. It's much easier to finish, much faster to finish. Takes less resources to finish. So that's one of the big reasons why we're going to the center. The second is that around the center objective, there are black holes and reactors, and these are special tiles which basically give you extra resources. And by extra, I mean a lot. It's like massive multipliers, which is really good to have. And the third point is going back to the travel times, which this one was the more important part, which no one else picked up on. When the game was over and I asked TU at least, because ED didn't want to talk at all. I don't know where they went. They just clocked out real early and then never came back. TU did not seem to understand that with how the travel times were, that if you have your colonies closer to each other, then you can reinforce, supply, and defend yourselves far easier than having to extend your forces out across the map. It was in my mind that we needed to get everyone's second and third colonies all together in one spot near the main objective, near the black holes and reactors. And so that way, when we get into the end game, even though we have massive fleets and big economies and all this and that, we are still all governed by the travel speed timer. That would stay a constant and would be a strategic obstacle from the beginning to the end. And that's why it was very important when I laid out the strategy that we were all going to go for the center, focus on the win condition, focus on the extra resources that we can get from all the special tiles, and keep everyone close together so that when we finally get into a fight, we'll be in a far better position to fight, basically. And by going into the center early, we basically adopt a very defensive position. And the defender in this game, with the rule set that we played here, has massive advantages because at this point in time, you could not concentrate your fleets and move them offensively. All right. The only way to concentrate fleets was to station them defensively on a colony that was an allied colony. You could not combine fleets together to send out to attacks. You can only defend properly. So yeah, and the way combat mechanics work, how do I explain it? Yeah, whoever has more ships basically wins. That's basically it. There's a lot of other nuances there, which I let all the other nerds figure out for me with the math and whatever. But that's the general gist. Whoever has more ships wins, and because you can stack ships very easily on a defensive position, you don't need to worry about getting timings correct, all this, that, and the other, which you can't do even if you tried as an attacker. Every time someone tried to attack a defended point, they had to attack one by one, right? Because you couldn't combine fleets to conduct an offensive operation. Everyone had to come in and attack you at one time. So if you had 5 players against 5 players, and on one side you had all 5 players combine their fleets on a single position, the attackers, they couldn't combine all their fleets together and attack the defensive fleet all together. That's not mechanically possible. They have to attack them one at a time. And because the person with the more ships has a massive advantage with how the combat mechanics work, basically meant that the attackers were at a massive disadvantage. They had to attrit the defenders ongoing and constantly before they could get any good gains out of it. So these were all the things that we had to figure out. This was all figured out within the first 12 hours, of which 6 of those I was asleep. Yeah, and then we ran with this strategy for the next 20 days. And all I could say is, as a strategic lesson, knowing when to pivot, knowing when to adapt to the position, to the situation, and then knowing when to double down on your cards. Yeah, these are things that you're gonna have to pick up, because if you don't pick up on them, you are going to get smoked, which is what happened to our opponents here. So going back to a little bit more grand strategy stuff here. Um, as you can see, the way that we were thinking, or at least how our faction was adapting to the situation, we were constantly inputting information that was occurring in the game, right? Every time there was a change, whether it had to be with the rule set for the game or our opponents, we take that information, put it into our brains, and then figure out, like, do we stay with our original trajectory or do we change? And we did this far quicker than anybody else did in the game. Um, for example, ED. ED had a core group of players which were all veterans from the previous game, and they had a lot of experience. But you can see that despite having the same kind of information that we were receiving, uh, from both the previous game and as the rule set was being explained to us by the dev. Um, Actually, no, the dev didn't even explain the rule set. We had to figure it out and then ask the dev what the changes were. um, ED, despite having the same amount of information that we had and getting it in the same time that we were getting it, they were incapable of adapting to the situation. So, for example, when talking about the initial strategy of when we had the opportunity to attack ED because we had a forward veil player. This was a strategy that was employed in the previous match. ED recognized this, but once the explanation around the travel times of the ships was introduced, they did not input that into their thinking, which I don't know why. Because if they did, they would have been able to avoid the blunder basically, because they basically ended their game. Now, I should explain for anyone out there that doesn't know about the mechanics of the game. When you start the game, you get a decision to either spawn in a conservative position or an aggressive position. And it's not explained on the page when you start the game what this actually means. But what it actually means is that if you spawn in the conservative position, you spawn where all the rest of your faction is supposed to be assigned, into one of the quadrants on the map. If you pick the aggressive position, what the game then does is it will spawn your colony in an opponent's spawn zone action quadrant, right next to them, basically. And we had a player pick that, and because he was a new player, this is Zix here, he didn't know, right? And because the faction only gets formed when the game starts, There was no way to warn this guy not to do that. But it happened. That's just the way it happened. And basically, as I'm saying, uh, due to how the travel times were, and also a couple of changes with how the ships were rebalanced and whatnot, we knew that trying to go early offensive with the rule set that was presented to us after the first 12 hours was that it was not going to happen. It was not going to work at all. There was no way we were going to be able to sustain an offensive operation like that to across the map. Now, ED, they had a bunch of players from the previous match which got destroyed by the one Veil player in the previous match, and they looked at their position, and all they could think was that, oh, we are in the exact same position as we were before, therefore we've got to do something about it. Which, okay, fine. But here's the thing: we opened up the diplomatic communications with them very early, and I wanted to avoid this for several reasons. One, there was a lapse in judgment with the rebalancing because they tried to change too many things. They changed the rule set regarding the ship stats, and they also changed the travel times. However, what this ended up doing was that Vale, the culture that was overpowered in the previous match, still ended up being the strongest culture in this game. And one of the big advantages that Vale had was that their ships travel faster than everybody else's by a wide margin. So we had strategic advantage if you were a Veil player. You had a massive strategic advantage because you could go places faster than everybody could by significant amounts, by sometimes days, literally. Um, so that also meant that when we are trying to transfer resources, right? The Veil culture has the transmutation feature, which nobody else has, which basically allows a Veil player to change resources into another type of resource, whichever one they want, one-to-one exchange, which is pretty overpowered. But it becomes more overpowered because that means that Veil players can have a self-sustaining economy because everybody else, if they want to transfer resources, can take literally days, or half a day. Even if you're next to each other, it'll still take hours. Uh, so that was that. We understood this when we were cooking up the main strategy, and that meant that the Veil players, not the Astron players, were the main economic powerhouses in this rule set. And we had the most Veil players, and I wanted to keep that strategic advantage. And to keep that meant I need to make sure Ziggs doesn't get blown to pieces. However, ED, just working off their knowledge of the previous game, recognized that there was a guy that was right next to them who was a Veil player, and that he probably could potentially wipe them out, which was never going to happen because with the travel times, even though Zix is next to their colonies, it takes a long time for his ships to cycle through and start attacking them. All right, in the previous match, our Veil player, he could basically hit everybody in the enemy faction within an hour. That's because of how fast travel times were back then. But this time around, that was never going to happen. It was not possible to do anything even remotely close. And if we're going to be perfectly honest, I tried to be very diplomatic about this when discussing the previous match before. It had nothing to do with the travel times. It was just a massive skill issue on the part of the folks that played in that game because they outnumbered the Veil player 10-1 basically. They had also players that were of the same culture, the Veil culture, on their side, but they were incapable of coordinating because they had zero communication. They had zero command and control, and yeah, they just didn't actually know what to do, and then that's why they got their asses kicked. This time around, they were in a better position because they had learned a little bit of their lessons there, so they had adapted. You see, they inputted information from the previous game, put it into the brains, orientated around this new information, and then pivoted. But the way that they're pivoting is just like 10 steps behind what it is that everybody else was, well, what we were doing, should I say. Now, I tried to talk to them. We opened up diplomatic communications very early on, and I tried to make a deal with them. Basically, I tried to figure out a way that we could not end up in another shooting war again. Now, this has to go back to basic strategy regarding free for all type strategy games like Risk or War of Dots, which I cover on my channel. When you're playing a free for all type strategy game where you've got multiple people playing for a single win condition, it's in no one's best interest to get into a shooting war straight off the bat, right? This is because if you take fundamentals of Risk, if you trade material immediately, you will give a strategic advantage to the other players that are not involved in that conflict. And then 9 times out of 10, the guys that don't get into the conflict very early on, they win the game because it's just math at that point. The same thing happens in Riftborne because the fundamentals stay the same. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The fundamentals of strategy gaming, right? Uh, you can just play the fundamental games like chess, poker, checkers, Settlers of Catan. I'd consider that a fundamental strategy game. If you play the simple games like these, funnily enough, the lesson that you can learn from the simple games, they're the ones that carry the most weight. Any other kind of game that you play that's more complex because the fundamentals remain the same. Goes back to the grand strategy that I was talking about earlier. And if you focus on the fundamentals, you can't go wrong. ED did not agree with this assessment at all. So we had a massive crisis here because we did not want to get involved into a shooting war because I understood that if we did that, we'd just be sacrificing ourselves. And any attempts at trying to win the overall game were basically shot at that point. So I had to figure out a way that we can avoid this. Diplomacy was the go-to strat, which didn't work out, or at least initially it didn't work out. I tried my best to explain to the ED commander, Bayo, basically, everything that I've discussed so far in this video, all the changes in the rule sets, the fact that this guy was a new player, this, that, the other. Usually in the previous game, what would happen is that the dev can and has in previous cases help revert this kind of position. But this time around, he specifically said from the get-go that he wasn't going to do any of that, or at least that's what he said at the beginning regarding this specific situation, that he wasn't going to do anything like that, which meant that we couldn't pull him out, which was what I was trying to do as well on the side, see if I can get the dev to move the guy, because it was on a mistake by the new guy. He didn't know anything about it. It wasn't explained anywhere in the game, and we had no opportunity to tell him about it. So that was what was going on. However, I'm pretty sure that Bayo had already made up his mind long before this that he wasn't going to listen to any kind of reason. He was going to wipe him out no matter what, because that's what happened in the previous game, which I said before. It had nothing to do with that. It was a skill issue on their part in the previous game. And as lo and behold, it was still a skill issue in this part of the game as well. They went all in on Zix. Now, here's what happened. Now, when you conduct diplomacy, right, it has to be to further an objective of some kind. For ED, all they could think of was short term that, okay, this guy was in the position that we were in before, and that means we need to just wipe him out and deal with it. In trying to do so, what happens is that you need to invest a ridiculous amount of resources at the beginning to get siege ships. Now, siege in this game is very, very time intensive and resource intensive. And the fact that their entire faction went along with this, which I still can't quite get my head around, they basically committed suicide straight off the bat. There was no way that they were going to recover economically from the amount of resources and time they were going to invest to kill this one player. Because the way the mechanics work in this game is that trying to wipe out somebody early on is basically impossible. It's the game mechanics are designed in such a way that you can't do any kind of blitzkrieg strategy. It's designed for long-term, slow burn type gameplay. The interesting thing is that they all knew this, all right? Because as I found out as the game was progressing here at this point in time, the main changes with the travel time speeds had been influenced by what Bayo and the rest of their core group in ED complained about, because these were the same guys that got wiped out in the previous match by the forward Veil player. And they basically had they had PTSD, and that's the reason why. Well, one of the big reasons why the changes in the travel time speeds had been changed. So they actually knew everything that I'm explaining out here, right? Because they were the ones that instigated the strategic situation that we all found ourselves in overall. Not the part about having the forward veil player. That one, as I said, honest mistake by the new player. He didn't know what was going on. We didn't have any opportunity to fix anything. It just happened the way it did. But remember, everything that else I've said regarding defending as well, the defender always has a massive advantage. This, that, and the other. It was as bright as day that they were going to just lose the game straight off the bat because they are going to, as I said, commit so many resources here that they're not going to be able to recover, which they didn't, or at least, or we thought they didn't. We'll get into other that topic later on. And I tried to explain this to them. Now, going back to leadership and diplomacy, we were running a one-party dictatorship, and my word was law. They, however, adopted a democratic institution and process for their faction. Now, going to diplomacy, I can give another lesson in this. Usually, you do not want to have multiple people conducting diplomacy or negotiations simultaneously. You want to keep it to as few people as possible. All right. This is to avoid how do I say? You want to avoid mixing up your narratives. You want to avoid slipping your intentions, which happens very often when you have multiple negotiators in a situation. You want to have ideally one, two, maybe three guys to conduct the negotiations, and that way you have a focused effort to get things done and to work things out properly. For online wargaming, the best way to do this is that you just have one guy, usually the leader, should usually be the leader or the second in command, go into the DMs and then hash it out there. You usually want to keep the negotiations, diplomacy in the direct messages. All right, you want to keep them private. Now, at what point do you go public? Now, this part here. Now, I understood that there are times and situations when you have to go public, all right? You have to make a public statement because if you don't, other people outside, right? If you're in a free-for-all type strategy game like this, if you're in a multiplayer, massive multiplayer online game like this, there are times when you have to make public statements because that way, right, you can then start getting political influence outside of the immediate situation. And then maybe if you know what you're doing, or if you get lucky, which we got lucky in this part here, you can get political support from other people who are not directly involved. Okay, so I'll explain what happened at this point. I went out and made a public statement regarding the situation here because I needed to get favor, political favor from the other two factions. Uh, that's just because I I was not going to commit us to a war. And as I said, Zix was a Veil player, which meant that he had a massive advantage that would be very helpful to us. It was in our best interest to not get involved in this conflict at all, because we would actually come out on top if we didn't start the war like this and get into a shooting war straight off the bat. I don't think ED had any kind of I don't think ED considered any of that when they were making the decision. They didn't have to. They had a one-track mind on this situation. But this is the point where I went public, made a public statement, and tried to explain what happened. And then, of course, what happened then is that they came out and, well, yeah, they did cook up a couple of lies. I did say that we offered the solution, which we did, but that they didn't want to accept it, and they also didn't make any reciprocal offer in return. And as it became apparent, because they then said in the exact same exchange in the open conversation, the open forum, that they didn't want to do that. And one of the reasons why I got them to admit that was that because they had supposedly adopted this kind of democratic process within their faction, I ended up being in a negotiation with 3, 4 people at one time. And yeah, I'll put up the screenshots of the conversation as it occurred. But basically, what happened in that is that exactly what I said just now. You want to keep it have just one person conduct negotiations, whether you're in a private message or in an open forum, because what happens then is that people will step over each other. And it was great because I got information out of that exchange which told me that they were not properly organized. Their command and control, especially compared to how they developed in the previous game. Um, Only reason why we can tell is because Bayo didn't use a another alias in this match, which is a function within the game. That's what I and Dead and Glad did. We used aliases moving into this game here, the hideout identities. Bayo didn't do that, so we could tell, and from what he was saying in both the private messages and in the open forum, that he had members from the previous match which suffered from the Veil player, forward player, wiping them out. Basically, they were basically the same gang, basically. And as the open forum progressed, I got them to admit that they didn't actually have a plan outside of that their past experience taught them that this was a bad idea, which it wasn't, and that and I got them to actually walk into a trap. I got them to accept the deal, which to I don't know, to me, when I got them to accept it, was absolutely bizarre because it was like the greatest play that I have ever made when it comes to diplomacy or politics in the online war game like this. Usually, it never gets to a situation like this where you willingly get an opponent to walk into a Vietnam situation. But that is literally what happened. I got them to trip all over themselves during the open forum negotiation. They contradicted themselves as to what it is that they want or how they wanted to do it, and then they also openly admitted it to everyone else, which then got us a lot of political favor from the other factions. Basically, from that entire exchange, what happened was that we got out of it. We got NC support. We actually got NC to send one of the players send ships over to the defensive operations when the war, well, this limited war, started kicking off. We got TU to stay out of it, and we got ED to accept the Vietnam situation. We basically, I put up the screenshot here. I said that okay, fine, we don't want a full scale war with you guys, okay, but Zix, he reserves the right to defend himself in any way that he sees fit. And we also reserve the right to any defensive operations. All right. And they accepted it. Zix could attack them if he wanted to, but he never really got the chance because, he had to face off 10 guys all simultaneously, and they learned their lessons from the previous one, as to how not to get their ass kicked by just one guy. But what we could do is that we could stack ships on Zix's main colony defensively. Now, going back to economics and long-term strategy, they had to invest a ridiculous amount of resources into making ships and to making siege and to trying to kill Zix. On our side, however, so we came up with the sub-strategy to the main strategy that we were only going to invest a little bit of amount of resources into shipbuilding. The main strategy was to eco-greed for the next few days or so that we could push the center, which was the big goal. And that's because I'm the leader. That's what all the announcements and all the messages that I spammed out over the next like 5 days once the limited war started was that everyone keep focus on the big picture, please. We need to get to the center, and then we need to play the end game situation. All right, the end game position is what we're ultimately looking for. But in the meantime, we are going to bleed ED dry, all right? And anyone that had already started making shipbuilding infrastructure, if they wanted to, they could make some ships and then send it over to Zix. And it worked out beautifully because I don't quite know how. I don't think there was any formal plan with regards to like the economics of how many ships we were going to build and in what capacity. But basically, we put in just enough of amount of resources to our ship making capabilities and sending them over to Zix without sacrificing the main strategy and being left behind. Because at this point in time, right, we needed to keep our eyes open and realize that the real pacing threat at this point in time was going to be TU. Because they were on the other side of the map. Their immediate neighbor, NC, was a non-starter, so they could also eco-greed. So we were in a race against TU at this point in time, which is the one thing that I had to remind everyone that we have to keep our eye on the big picture, because if we had gotten into a full-scale shooting war with ED, we would have lost along with ED. And if we didn't calibrate our ship production properly, if we invested too much into this little endeavor to quote unquote save Zix, which wasn't gonna happen, um, we'd also still lose, right? So we managed to balance it out. I don't know how we did it because there was no formal plan regarding the numbers, but we did. And ED basically bled themselves dry for the next 5 days or so. And as the game progressed, we had to, well, everyone expands, right? So we expand to asteroid colonies. That's the first main expansions that usually occur. And we had quite a lot of colonies that were quite close. Asteroid mining outposts, sorry, not colonies. They were quite close to them before the real shooting war ended up starting. Um, and yeah, they adhered to the treaty that we drew up for like the next 5 days or so. I was quite happy with how that turned out. Yep. Now here is where MVP title goes to Zix. I had to explain to Zix what the situation was because I said very early on in the Discord that we were going to play to win, and basically everybody except for one person bought into that. And I explained to Zix what the overall strategy was, um, what the grand strategy was, and that it was up to him whether or not he wanted to stick it out. And the fact that Zix basically played the game from start to finish, despite getting blown to pieces, which there's nothing he could do about it. It's just a numbers game at that point. Yeah, props up to him. Because if he hadn't done that, if he had folded very early on, which a lot of people do, I probably would have done it as well. No, he didn't. He fought on, and it basically prolonged it an extra couple of days. Really, I think it was like if Zix had given up immediately straight off the bat, yeah, it would have taken about 2 days less, about 48-hour window where ED could have just wiped out his colony and then called it a day there, but it didn't. He bought an extra full 2 days or 2 to 3 days of time where ED just basically wasted it on trying to kill him outright. So Zix basically single-handedly crippled an entire faction for us, and we basically didn't have to pay much for it at all. It was the greatest play that we ever got out. We knocked out a whole faction from the get-go for nothing. Good time was had by all. So going back to a little bit of diplomacy, I was about 80% sure that I knew who the NC leader was, and I actually ended up. Well, I was right, basically. We found out later on. It was a guy that we had played with in the previous match, which was on our team, Johnny. And knowing who you are negotiating with is a really big advantage if you don't know. And basically, the seeds of the Endgame alliance that we got with NC basically were formed at the very start because he reached out to us first. Now, he didn't know who I was because I was playing, well, we were both playing under aliases. But it is very common, and this once again goes back to what I talk about when learning strategy. Play the simple games first because they have the most to teach. It's very common in Risk or any other kind of free-for-all strategy game that the weakest player or faction will ally themselves with the strongest player or faction because there's a mutual benefit here. The weakest guy knows that he has no shot to win the game on his own, so he needs to get somebody else to help him out. The strongest player usually doesn't want to ally himself with the second most or the third most strongest, because usually what happens is that when they get into a conflict, it's usually up to them to shoulder the burden of the fighting, which means that they weaken their position more. Usually, they will weaken their position more than the weaker ally. By having the weakest player and the strongest player or faction ally themselves, there really isn't a big threat or risk to either side. The weaker player gets all the benefits that he's looking for. He's trying to survive into the end game and maybe get into like a third or second position at the end game. And the strongest faction or player, he's happy to have an ally because he gets a little bit out of it. what little resources or combat power that they have. He can utilize that to his own advantage, and he also doesn't have to really keep looking over his shoulder when the fighting does occur. He is going to be the one that has to shoulder the burden of the fighting basically and bleed his resources. He doesn't have to really be concerned about his ally backstabbing him later on, because usually if the disparity is large enough, which it was in this game, there's no chance that the weaker player is going to be able to get into a position where he can successfully backstab the lead player. So that's what happened there. Is that from the very beginning we had open diplomatic communications going on, and this played out for the next 20 days or so until we got to the Endgame alliance, which proved to be very, very helpful. It actually did prove that to be very helpful. Nobody else from ED or TU played any of these games whatsoever, which is their loss. Their loss. Now, when you're running a tight ship like we did here, it's a dictatorship of sorts. You want to keep the political level and diplomatic stuff close to, if you're the leader, that is close to your chest. The reason why is that, as I've hopefully shown from the previous exchange with ED in the open forum negotiation, um, one guy, you got to have one guy call the shots. It's the same with combat and in real life military situations. You got to have just one guy call the shots and then go with it. It's the same when you're talking about the political strategic level as well. If you have too many people start stirring up ideas, you start to lose focus, and then that can be just as deadly as getting into a conflict with someone that's even stronger than you. Now, the problem with this is that you will get into situations where sometimes people don't understand what it is that they're doing, right? And this is where leadership comes into play. As the leader, it's your job to make sure that everyone understands what it is they're doing, uh, without having to fully explain everything all the time. So when negotiation, strategy, and diplomacy was being conducted, the only two people that got the full picture in real time was Dead and Glad, because they're the officers, and I welcome their input. But to be a leader, right? And a lot of people get this wrong, and it's not just in the game here that I've noticed. It's literally everywhere now. People seem to think that a leader is someone that is there to placate or to satisfy the needs of his constituents or whoever's under his command, or to be likable. To be likable. That's what modern leadership for some reason is devolved into. That's not real leadership. The whole point of the leader is to make decisions for the greater good of whatever it is that he's a part of. When it's a unit, organization, team, you name it. That means that you're gonna have to make decisions that upsets people, whether you like it or not. Uh, if it's for the furthering the objective or for the greater good of everybody else, that's what you need to do. And I've made this very clear in this game and in other games as well, is that everyone's opinion is welcome, but when it comes down to it, my word is law, and we go with it, because that's the best way to run these things. That's how you survive in highly competitive environments. So I try my best to explain when decisions are made and why they were being made when the time is right. You can't just keep telling everyone all the time what is happening, because what happens if you do that is that you can sometimes create situations or environments where everyone gets a little bit anxious and everyone gets a little bit jumpy, and then people start jumping to conclusions all on their own without actually really knowing the full picture, because they're not the ones at the front line of the negotiations or the strategy or the politics. Yeah. It's interesting thing is that all of the main points in this game for the 20 days where I got scared, it had nothing to do with when things were going badly on the front lines in combat. It had nothing to do with when we were getting fleets wiped or if the strategy was going off the rails or anything like that. No, the times when I had heart attacks was when I wake up in the morning and read the general chat and then realize that there are people within the faction who are cooking up ideas in their head which if we were to adopt or if they were to put into effect, would derail my plans. And yeah, sometimes they would say things when negotiations were still in process or they didn't have any information, in which case then I just have to, like, tell them, don't worry about it. Something's been worked out. It's all being handled. But then there's times when I have already explained to them, right, after the negotiations were settled and the play was put into motion, uh, they'd still, like, either not completely understand what the situation was or what was happening, or they had missed it or something to that effect. That's why I had the announcement channel put out, so that there's one point in the Discord server where there's going to be no noise whatsoever. It's just going to be me talking directly to the team. When the time is right, I'll explain to them what's happening, what we're doing, and why. Let's get it done. Despite having all these things in place, there would still be people within the faction who either didn't understand or didn't see the message or something, right? And then they would, in the general chat, start talking about trying to enact ideas or enact plays that would be counter to what it was that we were trying to achieve. And in some cases, there were some points where people were saying things that would, shoot us in the foot really badly, by getting us into a position that we did not want to be a part of. That's when I started having heart attacks. But you gotta keep your cool when you're the commander. You gotta keep your cool. All right, don't freak out. If you freak out, everybody else is gonna freak out. And then yeah, talk to the team. When you're talking to your players in the team, right? Sometimes you have to talk to them directly, right? And I do this all the time. Sometimes you have to talk in the open forum, so like in the general chat of the server, and sometimes you have to talk to them in their DMs. Uh, a lot of times I see people not understand when they need to have a conversation in the public environment or in the private environment. I honestly can't really explain to people how it is I know when to do this and not. Yeah, all I can say is that this is something that you're gonna have to pick up if you want to, successfully lead a team. You have to figure that out. Now, going back to the strategy, there were a couple of times when things went really sideways. So continuing on communication, command and control here. I'll try to put a screenshot of how the Discord server was laid out. We used the Discord threads a lot. That was very helpful, because every time there was a major crisis or a battle that occurred, we'd use a thread, and that helped clean up the Discord server and keep the comms flowing very, very efficiently throughout the game. We had far better command and control in this match than in the previous match. You can compare with the previous after action report. I always try my best to not micromanage anything, and we got very successful results with that here. What basically happens is that every time there was a major battle or a major operation that had to be, executed, Dead would usually be the point guard or the quarterback for these things when he was available. But in other times, what would happen is that I just lay out the general idea of what we want that would further the main strategic objective of going for the center and then playing the end game situation. I'll just lay that out, and then I just let everybody else figure out the details and the tactics and the battle and fight the battles the way they wanted to. And it was great because we got the coordination 24/7 for basically everything along those lines. Everyone would talk amongst themselves and then figure out when and where they needed to transfer the resources, when and where to shuffle the reinforcements or defensive fleets around. Then they also figured out when to coordinate their own attacks and raids with each other. And yeah, I didn't have to do anything to interfere with that. Everyone within the team, once I had given them what the main objective is, they went and figured it out, which is very rare. It's very rare to have a random group of people, because this was a pickup game, to come together like that and then execute on a level like that is very rare. It's not normal. I should know because I've been playing games like this for almost 6 years. Yeah. Now the only point where I went full micromanager was when we were getting into the center, because we needed to make sure the colonies were all in a proper position so that So that we could enact the final strategy of getting all the resources from the extra resource tiles, making sure our interior lines were all well set and well supplied, so that once we had to fight a major battle or a major war, we'd be in basically the best position to do so. And yeah, this was the only point where I stepped in and started micromanaging and telling everyone, "You go there, I will go here. This other guy will go here, and we're gonna do it in this order, in this way." And everybody went along with it. I still don't know why everyone went along with it. Like outside of Dead and Glad, everyone else doesn't know who I am. I think the only person who knows who I was Dots, because we faced off against each other in the previous match, and I made the after action report out there. I don't think he watched it, so I don't think he actually knows who the hell I am. Yeah. Outside of that, no one actually knows who I am. Why they should follow me? Yeah, it's a little bit bizarre. I guess credit to Dead and Glad. They went along with it as well. Glad has been gaming with me for like 4 years now, and Dead. I don't know how he evaluated me as a player, but he was happy to go along with what we did, and we worked great. Cause like I said, I was like the fleet admiral, and he was the fleet commander, and the relationship we had as we conducted this entire campaign for 20 days, we never once had like a big argument or big fight or fallout or anything like that. Which, trust me, in games like this, that shit happens all the fucking time, and it can get really, really out of hand. I got stories, man. Jeez, that shit can fuck people up. But no, that didn't happen at all. I got the team overall in terms of personnel and overall the big strategic picture, get everyone into the good position. And then we finally had to fight the final battles, the big battles. There was the battle for the reactor and the battle for the center, which I'm about to get into the details here. Did, like I said, quarterback the whole thing. And yeah, we had all the pieces in position, all ready. And he just moved the pieces around for the tactics and the battles, and we wiped everybody. We smoked everybody. Um, yeah, I didn't have to do anything. I did everything else. This is the beauty about this game, which I really like, and why I got into it in the first place, because I could recognize the way that the game was designed. That there was a lot of areas which the player agency basically is at the forefront of the mechanics. If you take an example of like Hoi 4 or EU4, I don't like those games at all. There's a lot of like railroading, especially with like how I don't know what the name of the mechanic is in Hoi 4. The policies that you have to focuses. I think it's the focuses, something like that. You have to go. You're restricted in the way that you do things in that game, like who you can declare war on when you can declare war on people, and this, that, and the other. You have to role play and LARP a little bit. This game has none of that. The role play and LARP is just generated by the players themselves, which makes it really fun because it gets intense every now and then. And also means that when you get into the strategic gameplay, right, when you're finally fighting the big war, um, it feels like you're in like the real thing, kind of. Because the fleet admirals in like the old days, they're not the ones out there micromanaging ships. There's no map where you can right click and tell everyone to go here, there, and everywhere within a split second of each other. That's not how it works out in real life. The big shot fleet admiral who's sitting back in the headquarters, he only gets to maneuver all the pieces prior to the battle. And then when the battle begins, it's all the way down to the fleet commander. He has tactical control, and it's up to him to figure it out. I don't get to micromanage the battles themselves. That's not how it works. And this game lets you play that out very, very well. Because every time I go to sleep, I have to hand things off to Dead and Glad because of the time zones. Um, and yeah, it's basically all right. I've done everything I can now. I've done all the big piece maneuvering. Up to you guys to figure this shit out. Don't fuck it up. Good times. Beautiful game. So, okay, we will now get on to the next big point in the match. So, the battle for the reactor. There were only 6 reactors on the map, and there are 4 factions. And we knew that we were ahead massively in terms of eco. against ED. What we found out later was that we were also basically slightly ahead of TU, which was absolutely bizarre to us because they didn't get into any kind of conflict up until this point in time. They should have been full eco greed at this point, and yeah, basically we were ahead. Despite the fact that we were in a limited war situation, we had managed, as I said previously, to very effectively and efficiently distribute our resources to defending Zix and having the Vietnam situation drawn out as long as possible, and still keep up our pacing threat, which was TU, keeping our development and eco scaling on track and on time, and still be at the top of the game. Now, we decided to go and take quote unquote ED's reactor. Now, there was no formal agreement among any of the factions as to who laid claim to the territory on the map, especially near the center and especially on the reactors. We say it's ED's reactor because it was the one closest to them, so it's the underlying assumption that, yeah, if the reactor is closer to this specific faction, which was what happened in the previous game as well, then that's going to be their reactor. That's the unspoken rule of law for this game. And we said, nah, fuck him, we're gonna take this. And we did. Now, here is when things got real bad. So, there was an exploit in the game which basically let people find out when colony ships were being sent out to specific tiles. I'm not explaining it properly. Basically, if you now we only found out about this exploit after the game. I know towards the end of the game when things were already wrapped up. We couldn't figure out what exactly was going on. The dev finally explained to us towards the end that basically people could see where our colony ships were going out and where. And remember, the travel times in this game for this rule set here was ridiculously long. The amount of time invested into sending out colony ships, that was big. That was really, really big. All right. And basically, what happened here was that ED was managed to find out where our colony ships were going and when they would land. By default, game mechanically wise, you can't actually intercept the colony ship because you're not supposed to know. And you also can't really send out ships on offensive missions to certain tiles to like attack empty space or anything like that. You can't do that. But what you can do is that you can send ships preemptively to a tile to defend or to station themselves. And what happens is that if en route to this tile, enemy colony gets set up, then the mission to redeploy to that tile turns into an offensive mission. And basically, yeah, this is a way that you can attack points on the map, preemptively attack points on the map, which you're not supposed to be able to do. Yeah, they could see where our colony ships were going, and they were able to preemptively launch attacks and wipe out our colony ships once they landed, like almost immediately. And because it's very difficult to supply and defend new colonies, it basically meant that we were going to get set back for 3 days. Basically, that's what ended up happening. We lost 3 days of our economic advantage against ED, which basically actually allowed them to catch up to us because they were still focused on trying to destroy Zix. And yeah, the amount of resources spent on siege alone basically set them back 3 days or so. That's how big of an economic advantage that we had. And that's why I said earlier that they crippled themselves from winning the game here, because 3 days worth of economic growth is massive. This game only lasted 20 days. So there you go. But for the next 3 days, once we took their reactor, we got lucky. We got lucky with the first reactor. I don't know how it happened. Dead Slide has to fill in on this, how he actually held on to the reactor, because it was a goddamn miracle. He actually survived the initial attack. Once he landed his colony ship on their reactor, they already had ships in the air. They hit him, and he survived. And then from then on, we had a massive battle for the reactor. We ramped up. We had already started ramping up our ship production prior to this because we knew that they were going to attack us because we were going to take one of their tiles, basically. And so we had the ships on standby, but once again, travel times alone, it was all over the place for that initial day for the fight for the reactor. The battle for the reactor lasted, I think, like 4 or 5 days, almost a week. We had to do was really just spam ships and then send it out to the reactor and hold the reactor whilst Dead got the reactor up and running to supply us with Astra, which is the resource that the reactor gives, and also set up his own ship production on the front line there. Because once again, travel times, having the forward colony like that is a massive strategic advantage because that's where you can build the shipyards and then immediately build ships there, so you can bypass trying to reroute ships, trying to transfer them from across the map. So yeah, the Battle of Reactor, that's when the real war started. It was a proper shooting war. We were not able to save Zix just because of this exploit alone. Um, Zix died, he got wiped out, but the way the dev runs the game is that you get to respawn basically. So he came back. But the problem with the game is that even though there are safeguards and mechanics to try and make latecomers not be irrelevant in the game, it he was basically out of the game. He still played the game though, which still props up to him, and he still supplied us with resources towards the end. I think no, he supplied us with ships towards the end as well. But for the most part, he was out of the game. But he did his job, and he mentioned to me in a DM somewhere that he had faith in the game plan. I don't know how much that actually influenced his decision to like stick with it for this long and fight that hard, because he had a job as well. He was employed, so he came back after work and then would micro the shit out of his ships when he was in combat with ED, who basically round the clock was trying to get at him. Yeah, we couldn't save Zix. He died, but he did what he needed to do for the sake of the team and for the sake of the main strategy, which is all I can ask. That's all I can ask. I made it clear at one point somewhere that the only thing I asked out of everybody was, be a team player and play the game. That's about it. As for being a team player, because it was a pickup game, I knew that I could not specifically order people around to do things that they didn't want to do. Um, so, for example, we had Gaz. Uh, he he liked to lop a lot, and I was completely fine. All I asked for him was that to adhere to the main rules that was set out in terms of diplomacy. So, for example, don't attack ED directly just yet, because we have a formal negotiation and treaty, which is benefiting our entire faction. Don't do that. The massive heart attack. One of the first heart attacks I got was when he said to me that, "Oh yeah, I'm getting ready to start raiding one of these guys." I was like, "Whoa, okay, hold up. Can you wait a little bit, just a little bit? We're about to get into the shooting war, but just quite yet." Though that happened once or twice, but yeah, I can't boss people around as I do in my other games because this wasn't a volunteer group. This was a pickup game, so I had to be a little bit careful when we're getting around this and that. But for the most part, everyone bought into the main strategy. Every time I laid out the plans or the main objectives that needed to be executed, and I told them the way that we should go around doing it, then everyone pitched in their ideas as to how we should get it done and the better ways to get it done, and then they all work together. And as I said, through the Discord threads and whatnot, they all self organize themselves to achieve the objective and made my life a million times easier. And Gaz here, uh, I've got to mention, is an absolute G. He at one point sacrificed himself for the team for a play that didn't even work out, which I still feel a little bit bad about because he wanted to play very aggressively, and he built his entire economy around trying to get fast attacks out and get battles and raids going. But there was a point during this time when we were facing against the exploit, and ED was basically preventing us from making new colonies, especially on the other reactors, and yeah, on the other reactors. Um, I asked him at one point once the exploit was patched, that because he was capable of sending out the next colony immediately after the patch, I wanted him to go take one of the reactors. And basically, handling the reactor is a big job because now you're going to be super involved in supplying the rest of the team with the Astra, all right, with the resource that it gives a multiplier on. And I don't think he really wanted to do that. It wasn't something he was interested in. But we had a talk, and then he said, "Yep, no, I'll fucking do it." And I was like, "Goddamn, all right, cool." And then we got fucked in the end trying to send that out, and basically set him back. I should mention how we were able to keep our economy scaling at the rate that we did, despite being in the conflict. We would boost certain players one at a time. That meant sending them extra resources. The entire faction would pitch in. So instead of trying to sacrifice an entire player's economy for the sake of another player, what we did was that everyone played the game the way they wanted to. They played their ecos and their shipbuildings and whatnot. Let them do that. But uh, when we had a player that we designated to boost, everyone who had spare access resources, we would pull them all together and send it to that one person, and then get that person ahead so that they could then get out their colony ship faster and yeah, get the ball rolling for the main strategy going on. The reason why the ED exploit hit us really badly was because we were boosting players one at a time. At one point, we were doing it two at a time as well. Uh, we get them boosted, and then they'd send out the colony ship, and the colony ship could take anywhere from like 8 to 24 hours, 36 hours, a day or so. The time that's wasted for sending that colony ship out sets back the whole faction because we were boosting these players to get them ahead so that once they got their colonies out on the reactors, then they would then return and supply us back with the boosted resources. But this basically cut us off from that, and it hurt us real bad. Things that were happening at the same time was that the dev started changing the travel time speeds for ships because it was taking too long. The problem is that these changes happened when we were making plays with the colony ships. So there would be cases where, and also because we were getting into the conflict as well. So there would be cases where we'd have ships in the air that were still traveling on the old travel times, but then there would be other ships moving around that weren't, and things got all mixed up and screwed around here. And also allowed our opponents to get a little bit of advantage here and there when they were trying to prevent our colonies from properly deploying. It was a shit show. That whole 3-day period, it was pretty fucking bad. Morale for the team dropped like a rock. At least I think that's what was happening. Um, Glad told me that the morale was actually all right. It was just people were getting really fucking annoyed with how the dev was handling the game, which I was absolutely get fucking annoyed. The thing about this change in the exploit, right, was that the dev in the previous game, he actually fixed a lot of big problems very quickly, almost immediately. There was a point where one faction accidentally surrendered. He reverted that very quickly. There was several points where colonies were bugged out, and basically colonies were set up that shouldn't have been set up or weren't supposed to be set up. He would revert that very quickly and all this and that. So I already knew, because the president was already set, that he was capable, he had the power to change very quickly big problems in the game like this exploit. But what happened as it was going on, because as I said, we didn't know what the hell the exploit was. He only explained it to us afterwards, how it was happening, how ED was doing it to us. But as it was happening, I was trying to figure out from him what it was that was happening, and can he do something about it, basically. And he made the conscious decision 24 hours into this 3-day fiasco that he was not going to change anything about it immediately. No, that's incorrect. He was not going to do any reversions immediately because the game integrity was at stake, which is true. The game integrity was at stake, but in waiting to fix the problem and in waiting to do any reversions, you're making it worse. And that's what I was trying to say. He eventually did give compensation, which it was, compared to what we lost, basically was minuscule of a compensation. He gave Dots one of his reactors back, after being knocked out twice in a row by the exploit. But by that time, we had actually basically won the conflict. So despite being set back 3 whole days and letting ED catch up to us economically, we burned them out and won the war. They clocked out after that. But it was very disappointing, and especially the reasons that he was giving, it didn't add up at all. Uh, Now, in my previous video, I discussed as to how to solve internal communication, political problems in a team. Deal with the team dynamics and all that. And what I said was that talking to people basically resolves 90% of all the problems that you have. In the previous after action report, I said that one way that Glad could have solved a problem with one of the other members in the team was just talk it out with him because he was contradicting and challenging his stuff in the middle of the game, which got really annoying and led to extra burnout on his part. But I also said in that video, the 1 time out of 10 situation, what do you do when that doesn't work out? Well, here we are. I want to tell you what do you do when you get into that 1 out of 10 situation when you have a troublemaker in your team that you got to deal with. So for me, you win or lose doesn't matter, but your integrity has to be held throughout the whole thing, right? The team integrity is the end all be all for a team. Okay, that can never ever be sacrificed. It doesn't matter what you have to sacrifice in order to maintain team integrity. Okay, this is held above all else. We had a troublemaker who basically refused to play ball. Well, no, that's not true. This person basically sabotaged the team twice over. No, not actually twice over. I think other people actually kept tabs of how many times things happened because I wasn't even keeping tabs because I had other things to fucking deal with when we were trying to win the war and win the game, basically. But this troublemaker basically uh, stole and misallocated the faction resources. Remember when I was talking about the boosting, how important it was? When we got set back uh, when our colonies were getting intercepted because the amount of time that was spent boosting the resources and then waiting for the return on the investment to come back to us. This person consciously made several decisions even before they got banned that basically shot us in the foot at both foots. Uh, Now we talked to this person throughout the entire process up until this point. Okay. So the communication was already there. What I found out later on, right, and everyone else found out, was that this person was actually mentally challenged. This person doesn't actually know how to communicate to people. What this person does is that they would talk to you, right? And then they'd get all the little bits of information that you're telling them. And then what happens is that when they try finally make a decision, what they do is that they cherry pick all the things that they want to know or would like to think that is like in their mind the correct thing, and then execute upon that information alone. They cherry pick things that occur or is told to them, and just go along their merry way. Problem with that is that when you're in a team play, in a team situation, in a highly competitive environment, you can't afford to do that because you're gonna fuck everybody else up. And this person just could not understand this at all. They are incapable of actually having any kind of empathy to other people outside of their own self. I have never quite had to deal with someone like this before in a team. Usually, I identify people like this very early on and then just get them out. But because this was a pickup game, I couldn't do that. So this had to be played out until we got to this point. And what happened after that was that this person abandoned the team. Like I called them out because it had to be called out because they were setting us back. They basically stole resources from the faction because they refused, once they got the boost, went off and did something on their own, which they had agreed to previously to do. Remember what I was saying? They like to cherry pick the information. To some people, it may not make any sense. Well, it's not going to make any sense because this person was mentally challenged. Like, properly, something was fucking wrong in their head. This person would literally go through what occurred in the past and then only select certain bits of information and then act upon that. And it's not like they didn't understand the other parts that were told to them, right? It's not that they were they weren't aware or there was miscommunication, because I have the logs, I have the Discord logs where they acknowledge when when the team was organizing the plays to this person, that he agreed to all these things that was being explained to him, and why they were being explained, and why we had to do it in the way that we had to do it. Just didn't give a damn. So once I called them out, they abandoned the team. They left Discord. I was in the process of actually writing up the like a reprimand. Basically, I was going to give them the opportunity that it's you need to apologize to the team for what you did, and you need to publicly make that apology, and then say that you're not going to do it again, and then you can still keep playing with the team. Basically, that was what I was writing up. Very short essay to give to them in DMs. But by the time I was about to get ready to send the message, they left and they abandoned the team. And then what happened after that was absolutely fucking ridiculous. Everyone got really, really upset out of this, because this person then actively started sabotaging the team. The way expedition tiles worked at this point in the game was that you had to give specific resources or ships to an expedition tile, and an expedition tile basically gives a area of effect bonus to colonies around it. The problem with the Arm the Rebellion expedition tile is that you have to send one specific type of ship to the tile, and then you get the bonus. If you send multiple different ships, what happens then is that you reset, well, not quite reset, but you set back other ships in that tile that was sent. So if we are trying to get one specific ship boosted for the tile, we have to just send that one ship. Because if you send others, it then sets back the progress for that other ship boost. This person knew this very well, and basically was sabotaging the tile for us. And we were also about 80% sure, at least did, and somebody else was pretty sure that they were already leaking intel to ED, because we were still in the shooting match at this point in time. Uh, the attacks basically on the reactor were all very well timed to our reinforcements, and basically they were wiping out our ships on the reactor. The battle was not going well. The war at this point in time was going really, really badly. Yeah, it was pretty damn bad. And once this person got banned, then they went full scorched earth, or at least they like to think they did. Went out and basically doxed themselves into their alt accounts, and the leaking of the intel, and doxing the Discord IDs, and all this and that all happened out. Everyone saw it. I really don't know why, like, you do this, because no one's ever gonna like properly play or trust you again. This kind of behavior is fucking amazing. This person even came after not only me in DMs, but other people in the DMs as well. It were completely unhinged messages. There was this person. I'm telling you, this person was actually mentally challenged. I do not know what the hell was going on. But Jesus Christ, yeah. Now, why do I have to bring up the team integrity thing? There was no way in hell that I was going to ever accept this person back into the faction without a formal apology and understanding that you're not going to do this type of shit again. Because everyone in the team up to this point played the team game. Everyone at this point in time, as the battle was going on and we were actually fucking losing it. Well, morale was low. We found out we were winning, but at the time it looked like we were fucking losing it. Um, Everyone had sacrificed something, not just in terms of the resources in the game, but people actually made personal sacrifices. This was a quote that I had. I don't know where I heard it from, but great teams are made when individual players make personal sacrifices. I think that I got that quote from. It wasn't the movie, but it was the event that the movie was based on. It was Miracle. It's got Kurt Russell in it as the coach, head coach. It's about the 1980 uh, Miracle on Ice, the Winter Olympics hockey game between the United States and the Soviet Union. It's like one of the greatest sport upsets in history. That was an amazing movie, but also the story that it was based off. There's interviews with the movie film team and the actual guys that actually played the game in 1980. It's an amazing story as to what they actually accomplished in that one game of ice hockey in 1980. But what you get out of that, either the film or the event itself, the team integrity has to be held above all else, because you can, and I see a lot of people do this, and it applies not just to games, sports, or online computer games, but it applies to real life as well. If you are willing to sacrifice your long-term goals or your long-term objectives, or in this case your principles, for short-term games, yes, you can probably get a win out of it, but in the long run, it's not worth it at all. It is not worth it at all. In this case here, the person that was basically sabotaging the whole fucking team for no goddamn reason was one of the most active players on our team, and was doing a lot of work in terms of resources and ships production for the team. But as I said, you can't let one person just go out and basically backstab the team like this on terms of principle alone. If you do that, right, and you sacrifice team integrity, team goes to shit. And I've seen it happen many, many fucking times in all the games that I've played over the years. The moment that you let a troublemaker like this stir up trouble like this, right? Uh, then shit gets fucked. Because then everyone takes a look around, and the people that sacrificed basically the time and sleep, I think Dead went a couple of days where he didn't sleep at all because he had to micromanage the battle for the reactor and several other things. I lost a lot of sleep trying to keep up the diplomacy and all this bullshit that was going on. Also had to keep the rest of the team informed and well aligned with the objectives. Other people, Zix, I think he also had a couple of sleepless nights where he was micromanaging the defense of his colony. Yeah, everyone sacrificed something for the team that went above and beyond the game. And I, salute to everybody that followed us on here. This one could not. This event where this one troublemaker decided to backstab everybody, you could not be left alone, all right? Because if you did, the what we had built up to this point in time would go out the fucking window. And I am very certain that we probably wouldn't have won if I had let that happen. And the funny thing is that happened, I think. Oh, sorry, hit the table there. The funny thing that I think happened was that even though we were in the middle of the worst point in the game, morale was probably, well, my morale was shot. I was like this close to actually quitting the game because of all the bullshit that was going on. Um, I got pretty close, but I stayed the course because I led everyone this far, right? how how can I abandon the team when they've all followed me this far? That was like the final thing I had to say to myself when I was awake at night looking at the ceiling. It's like, shit, man. I gotta go to work tomorrow and I gotta deal with all this bullshit. Yeah, no, I got really close. I think other people got really close. One person actually did drop out after this whole fiasco here, and everyone did recognize that this person, statistically speaking, was helping us out a lot. But no, I made that decision that this person wasn't going to get back in unless they apologized on those grounds alone. And I called them out, which led them into abandoning the team as well. We're not going to sacrifice the team integrity for that. And the team, I think, after this event, rallied around it. That's the feeling I got, because we were in a pretty bad fucking situation, and it was after this event um, that was really bad, because once you ban a player from the faction, which we did a couple of days later, once we realized that they were already sabotaging us, because I gave 24 hours or so opportunity for this person to come back and apologize, but they didn't take that opportunity. Um, yeah, um, the team kind of rallied around the flag after that point, and we won the battle. The day after we banned this person, and basically we also had to fight this person, because once you're banished, you become a part of like a neutral faction, which basically means you can now attack your allies because you're not part of the main faction. We then had to start spending resources to destroy them, which, to be honest, we wiped out their fleet, his fleet, like very, very quickly. And after we wiped out his fleet, just keeping him suppressed, it was very easy. The siege thing, that took a little bit more time because we weren't on the siege front just yet. We started doing that towards the end of the battle of the reactor, I think. But yeah, once this guy was suppressed, he was out of the game. But we lost a lot of resources and some ships that he was producing for the team. But like I said, man, if you sacrifice team integrity for short-term games, you're just gonna fuck shit up for everybody. And as I said, it kind of rallied the team around the flag because everyone realized that, well, we're in it for the long run. This is the strategy that we've adopted. This is the team that we've got. We'll go the distance and see what happens. And that's what happens. Now, the dev asked me for input regarding this match in particular, and all I can say is that yeah, your lack of vision and leadership for the game overall is lacking a lot because I not only played online games, I used to before I went over to university. I used to be a part of the miniature wargaming scene in my town. So tabletop wargaming and card gaming, those two things as well. So I got a lot of experience with community run things, right? And what was very disappointing was how the dev handled this whole situation. This person was actually mentally challenged. Like, I don't need to really explain myself. The DMs all over the place, and the entire team, which I think at one point was like 11, 10 players or so on our side, they all saw it. They all know this guy is fucking insane. NC, we let them in on what happened. They know this guy is fucking insane. As like more than half the player base for the whole community already knows this person's fucking insane. This person stirred up so much fucking drama. Other people were getting really fucking annoyed. I actually got, for the first time in my life, I had to deal as a leader with a relationship issue between one of my players and their significant other. As wild as that fucking sounds, it happened. One of the players on our team had a boyfriend who introduced her to the game. So she was playing, the boyfriend wasn't playing, but the boyfriend played in the previous match. I'm gonna try to keep everything as anonymous as possible. But yeah, the boyfriend was getting the boyfriend DM'd me. The boyfriend DM'd me and said, "Dude, what the fuck is going on?" He's like, "You gotta handle this." I have nothing I can do. I can't handle it. This is out of my power. You gotta talk to the dev if you want to do that. But no, yeah, it was the problem with this person who was stirring up unnecessary drama even after they got banished from the team. Was just going all over the place, absolutely fucking unhinged, absolutely insane. Yeah, my play my the play on my the player on my team that was getting really worked up about the whole thing was getting really agitated in real life. It was affecting their relationship. And I mean, shit, man, what can I do? All I said was that the only way we can solve this is just finish the game and get it over done with, and we don't need to see this person ever again. And yeah, that placated the boyfriend for the next week or so as the game progressed. Geez, man, I know that in real life, real people have to deal with this shit. Like, I'm talking like, real life commanders, military unit commanders. I know team players in professional sports. There are stories that I'm aware of. This is part of the job, quote unquote job, that you have to deal with. Every now and then you have to deal with relationship issues, not only within the team, but from outside the team, like this. The first time I ever had to deal with it. And it was something. I'll tell you that it was something. So first, I'm glad I got that experience. I'm glad. No, I'm not. Now, that's yeah, going back to feedback for the dev. Yeah, man, dude, leadership doesn't mean leading in the game or in the team. It happens everywhere else. Even if you're not in a competitive environment, leadership still occurs for community and all this kind of stuff. Where I'm from, if there's for someone like this who's unhinged, and I got to give credit to the Magic the Gathering community in my country, they have like quote unquote special kill orders that are put out on people that are this fucked up in the head because there's a lot of people that play Magic the Gathering and other kind of like nerd type games that are unhinged. Yeah, people coast to coast, they get informed about people like this, and then they inform all the rest of the players and all the communities in other towns and cities that this person comes around. You play with them at their own risk. They are usually almost always ostracized and yeah, kicked out of the community because if you let one bad apple in, they invite more bad apples in, either consciously, unconsciously, or how do I explain it? When it comes to communities, there doesn't need to be an organized conspiracy for all the bad apples to get together with each other. It just happens naturally. People like this need to be put down immediately, because if you don't and you let them fester in the community, shit gets fucked. Um, when it comes to teams in the competitive environment, I've seen this happen so many times. I had a friend in another foxhole regiment. He explained it to me what happened. It happened several times to several regiments he was a part of. Basically, you get one or two type characters who are really active, and you're thinking short term. Again, oh, this person's active in the community. He's getting a lot of traction and community involvement. He's getting plays. He's helping out all this and that. It's not worth it. It's not worth it in the long run, because you end up paying for it big time later on. This person should have been put down. The other thing that should have been put down was the use of the exploits. Nothing was said about that at all. Now, I'm not saying that you need to ban these people either. No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that it needed to be addressed, because that's what leadership does, or good leadership does. The best example I can give was, once again, another Foxhole example. God, I hate that game. In Foxhole, there is also alt accounting, which, once again, this person that decided to fuck shit up for everybody knocks themselves into admitting that they were cheating. They had alt accounts and all this bullshit as well. And nothing happened. As far as I know, no one did anything out of that. I don't know why. Uh, yeah, going back to this thing about dealing with people. In Foxhole, there is alt accounts, so you can make an account and go on the enemy team and then get intel. When I was running my regiments, I made it very clear that when it comes to intelligence gathering, no one is allowed to talk to the enemy to gain information or make alt accounts. That's because the devs were not going to do shit about this at all. And other people in the game also didn't do shit about this at all. And what this was doing was that it was creating a very, very toxic community within the Foxhole game space. And a lot of people all over the place were getting really bitter about it. It was like really big drama that always gets popped up. And my main concern was the kind of attitude that we were getting in our faction overall from all this bullshit that was going on was basically hampering our ability to be effective. It was basically making us a bunch of whiny crybabies all the time, crying foul every time something bad happened. And it was absolutely fucking pathetic, because people would then just wallow in their misery and just stir up unnecessary drama for no reason and not put in the work to make themselves more effective in the game itself, which was the actual problem, was that everyone was incompetent most of the time. So I made it very clear within my regiments that anyone caught doing any of these degenerate behaviors, they were going to get banned immediately, no questions asked. It didn't solve the problem, right? But it created the kind of environment and tone within the group that I was running that said, we're not going to go down this bullshit toxic route of where we're just going to keep on complaining all the time. No, that's not going to happen. No one's allowed to do this shit. And as far as I'm concerned, if anyone else does this shit, fine, but we're not going to interact with them. We're going to play our game the way that we know how and the way that we intend to play, basically become effective and competent in the game. And yeah, that's the main example that I can give here, is that the exploit stuff should have been addressed out openly, that this kind of behavior, nothing that we can do about it, right? Alt accounts or using exploits or whatever. But if the tone is not set, you're going to still create an environment where other people of the same mindset are going to come into the game, and then they're going to multiply. And then later on, as the game and the community develops, it's going to become an even bigger problem. That's the only other piece of advice I can give on that topic. Yep. I can't speak to the game development of the mechanics and all that. There's plenty of other people that are all obsessed with that, as I've already mentioned. You can get information on that alone, but as I said before, that's minor details. The bigger problems that need to be addressed. So there is that. Now, Battle of Reactor was won. ED burned themselves out, and we were still in the bad position because we had expended a lot of resources into that war with ED, that we were now behind TU, or so we thought we were. TU, after the game, I talked to the commander Toaster, and what I found out was that they didn't have a strategy, basically. They were not interested in playing with any of the changes that occurred. They didn't adapt to any of that. They didn't do much. I do not know why. Um, it's not like they couldn't have done so because they were all very intelligent guys. They all had like the charts for the graphs for all the economies and the resources and all this and that, which I'm always very impressed because I haven't got a goddamn clue how any of that works. Like I said, I don't even know how the math works in the game. I get other people to figure that shit out for me. But they were all capable of doing all these things. But when it came to actually playing the game and trying to win, they decided not to do anything for that. Um, I don't know. It happened. They actually got into a conflict with NC whilst we were wrapping up our battle with Reactor, and that meant that they invested a lot of resources into their shipbuilding as well. So I think that actually helped us out a little bit, trying to keep our pace with TU because that was always at the back of my mind, and I tried to keep everyone focused on the long-term endgame situation. EU is the main pacing threat. It's not ED because they already crippled themselves. We need to make sure that our economy scales well so that when we get into the final battle with TU, that we can win it. And yeah, TU just completely ignored. They expanded to their reactors. They got 3 reactors, which was a really big resource boost for their economies. But other than that, they didn't do anything. They didn't go for the center. They didn't go for any black holes. They I didn't even see any kind of coherent expansion plan. They just sort of expanded anywhere and everywhere, which meant when we got to the end game situation, right? We were not only ahead on eco, but as I mentioned earlier, our strategic position on the center on their main win condition objective meant that they had to come to us. And our entire faction had already deployed themselves all together close in the center. When they tried to attack us, there was basically nothing they could do. We had all our ships and resources, good interior lines, all set up well enough to defend our positions very effectively, and they were on the back foot. They didn't have any strategic advantage in economy. They didn't scale that properly to us. They had no tactical advantage because we had plenty of ships all well boosted up. And yeah, they gave up about after a day when they declared war on us. And yeah, there's nothing they could do after that. Good game. Now here's the thing that because it's the after action report, they actually could have done a lot of damage, and there is the possibility that they could have won. The only way they could have won was to force a burnout on our side. They had superior fleets to us at the start of the war when they decided to swing at us. That was because we hadn't quite developed all our shipbuilding capabilities around the boosted tile ships, the Arm the Rebellion expedition tiles. The only person with a very good fleet was dead. And at this point in time, when TU attacked us, Dead was on a work trip. So he couldn't actually micro for a week. So there was a one point in time where TU had far superior fleets to us. Tactically and operationally, they had a massive advantage. Strategically, they were not going to be able to catch up to us in terms of resources, but that doesn't mean they were completely out of the game. They could have made some plays if they had been able to coordinate themselves properly, which I didn't see any real coordination occur. Because the final campaign and the final battles that happened, they made a lot of very, very dubious decisions. They actually split their fleets up despite the fact that they had the advantage when they were all grouped up. I'm talking about individual players here. There was a player called Liz. He had a very good fleet. It was we were scared of him for a couple of days, but he didn't play to his strengths. He split up his fleets and then sent them around to attack our positions, and that basically allowed me, because I was the second player with the most capable fleet on our faction. Once the war started, everyone else was still gearing up for this final battle. I could actually defeat him in detail, which I did. There was a 7-hour battle that I faced off with him as he was attacking us. And basically, I kept my fleet concentrated. He split his up, and I ran around because we had good interior lines. Remember, travel time speeds. He had to travel a longer distance, which meant that we could see where he was going and with what. And because all our colonies were all grouped up together in the center, I could hop around all over the place and fight multiple battles in quick succession and beat him. And I basically knocked out his cruiser fleet to half its strength by the end that day. And that was basically he was never going to recover from that because our economies were far better than them. So yeah, that one point in time they actually had an advantage, but they didn't push the advantage. They I don't know. You can't say that they gave up at that time because they attacked us and they came at us with everything they had. And yeah, command and control. Just looking at the way they attacked us, didn't seem there was any organization on that part. So there's that. That was the end game battle. A little bit anticlimactic. They gave up, and we walked through the victory condition at the center tile. Pops up to NC, who basically were in fourth position for the whole game because they were a non-starter faction. They basically finished in second place. They were allied with us all the way to the end. Towards the final battle with TU, because TU had attacked the well, they had got into a conflict over the reactor that was in between their territories, which was closer to the NC actually. Uh, yeah, they weren't interested in negotiating with TU, so they didn't switch and try to backstab us. They stuck with us for the Endgame alliance. It was a formal alliance. We kept that alliance all the way till the end. They actually helped us out in the final battles. They started raiding and attacking the outlying colonies that TU had near their frontier. And they also supplied us with a lot of intelligence. There was a player in NC which basically spammed a shit ton of spies. That actually helped accelerate the victory by about a day or so, I think. Up-to-date intel on the enemy fleets. We managed to wipe them out in quick succession after that. And yeah, that was basically the summary of the entire multiplayer match, the third multiplayer match for Riftborne.